Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome everyone to IE342 Quality Control. And today's lecture we will talk about our third control charts for variable is the moving range chart, or they call it the XMR or the individual MR. Stands for the moving range. Stands for the individual. The XMR chart is a combination of two control charts. The first one is the individuals, and the second one is the moving range, and both of them assigned to track the process variability and mean shift. The individual chart is triggering the mean shifts in the process, whereas the moving range is the one that monitors the process variation in the data. So we have the two, as we did have the X bar R and the X bar S control charts. We used to have two charts. Each one of them is assigned to monitor a specific parameter. Today, the same. We have the XMR or the IMR control chart, which contains of two control charts, one for monitoring or triggering the process mean shift, which is the individual chart, and the moving range is the one that monitors the process variation. It measures the variation between each measurement and the previous one. When we use the XMR or the individual MR chart, we use it when we have no sample size, we have individual readings. So our decision criteria for selecting the control charts from the beginning is based on the sample size. First, we have to identify the type of data. And this chapter is dealing with the variables, control charts for variables. So all data has to be continuous, not attributes. Then we have studied, or we have covered, three types of control charts: X bar R, X bar S, and today the X bar MR or the IMR. The decision criteria to select among these three control charts is the sample size. The sample size, if it is greater than 10, then we use the X bar S. If it is less, then we use X bar R. If it is individual reading, then we use the X bar moving range or the individual moving range control chart. The construction of the control limits for the X bar MR, we have, as we say, two control charts combined together. When we develop for the X bar, we have to have the center line, which is the X bar formulation, which is all the readings divided by the number of the readings, normal average. The MR is the subtraction between each reading and its previous reading, and the MR bar is the average of all the sum of those subtractions. We will see an examples in the next slides. For the control limits for the individual or the X bar control chart, we use the upper control, lower control by calculating the X bar plus or minus, depend on if you are developing the upper or the lower, the multiplication of the constant E2 times the average of the moving range. The E2, there is a table, calculate this constant for you, which is equal to A2 multiplied with the sample n, which is the square root of n, which is 1. Or there is another formula, both of them the same, do the same thing, and we will see also an example how both they give you the same results. X bar plus or minus means if you are developing the upper control, you will use the plus. If you are developing or constructing the lower control, then you use the minus. So if it is the upper control, X bar plus the division of 3 times average of moving range divided by D2. This is another constant. We will see all of them in the coming slides. And for the control limits for the moving range, the upper control limits develop using this formula, which is D4 times the average of moving range, and D4 is a constant. The center line is the average of the moving range, and the lower control limits is the D3 times the moving range, which is the average of the moving range. So let's go and see those constant from the table and then go back to the example. Here is the constants, D2, and the other constant, for example, E2 and D4, all of the constant that we are going to use. For the moving range, it is already categorized here in this side of the this table. It shows you all the constant you are going to use. Most of the time we will use the first one since it is the least one. The sample size for individual considered to be the minimum, which is here in the table 2. So you are going to use 2 all the time for the individual control charts. Let's go to the example. The example says a tensile strength. This is strength test for metal parts. You have maybe experienced this if you have studied manufacturing process to test the strength of the metal pieces. Is an important quality characteristic for bridge bolts. If you are going to design a bridge bolts, definitely you have to apply this tensile test to make sure that they are strong enough and can hold the bridge enough well. The bolts are made of amide steel. This is the code of that steel, ASTM A36. Because a tensile strength test destroys the bolt and each bolt is expensive, a sample size of 1 was decided upon. 25 bolts were tested. And now ask you as an industrial engineer, what type of control chart you are going to use based on the measurements that you will have here for the bolts. And here is the tensile strength. That was the maximum that bolt could achieve before it break down. And those the readings here in this column, and these are the number of bolts, the 25. You as industrial engineer, since you knew that it is individual readings and it is a variable data, then the X bar MR control chart is the one would be selected. How we calculate this column, the moving range, you subtract the value of the tensile strength. Always the first one will be empty because you cannot do subtraction for the first one. You start with the second reading. The second reading moving range is basically you subtract the 70.87 minus 60.27 and you will get the 10.6. So the subtraction between the previous reading with the current reading give you the moving range. That's why we don't have for the first one, so we start always with the second reading. The third reading will do the same. The third reading will place next to the 69.51. So you subtracted with the 60.27 to get the 9.24. For the fourth reading, the moving range calculated by the subtraction of the reading number 4 minus number 3. That means 66.84 minus 69.51 will give you the 2.67, and so on. So you will continue with this until you find the last reading or until you achieve the last reading, the 25th reading. The the average of those readings represent the average of MR, the average of the moving range. So the moving range column, it is calculated by U, is not given. The only given is the individual readings for the variable data. And for the average of those readings is simple. You just add them and dividing them by 25 to get the X bar, which is 69, and the moving range is 11.4. As we said earlier, the moving range is triggering the variation of the process, whereas the X bar is triggering the mean shift of the process. To develop the control limits, doing that using the formulas we have covered earlier in the previous slides. To do the X bar, it is already calculated in that table. Now to find the upper and lower control, you have the X bar, you have the 3 standard deviation, and then you have the average MR calculated from the previous table or readings. What about the D2? Where we can find the D2? It is given in the constant tables. You go to the table D2, it is placed next to the subgroup 2 because this is the minimum number size of subgroups for individuals. You will get the 1.128 as the one used for D2. The same for the lower control, except that has to be minus. I think there is a typo mistake. This has to be minus, not plus. So the lower control will be minus instead of plus. For the moving range control chart, we have the average of the moving range calculated by having the sum of the moving range divided by the 24 instead of the 25. Pay attention to this one, please. Okay, because we have 24 here. Always we have the first one is not given or is not applicable for calculation, because we cannot calculate the average for the first the subtraction for the first reading. We cannot subtract the first reading from any previous readings. So when we calculate the average for the moving range, we have to pay attention that the number of readings will be 1 minus the total. Okay. So the total of readings is 25. So the N for the moving range calculation, it is 24. Whereas in the X bar, it is 25 because that is not applied for the individual readings average. Now, what about the upper and lower control? Basically, as we did also for the formula, we use D4 and D3. D4 for upper control, D3 for the lower control. And to find them from the table, D4 and D3 for sample size 2, which is what we are going to use for individuals. So D4 is 3.267, and D3 is 0. Also here, to find that, I told you how those two formulas are equal to each other. If you go and find the X bar plus E2 times the average of MR, if you multiply the E2, which is the constant here in the table, 2.66, if you multiply it with the moving range and you add the average, you will get the same result, because basically E2 is the division of 3 divided by T2, and that also can be found from the table, or you can use the 3 divided by D2. This division, 3 divided by D2, it is equal to E2, okay? So those will give you the same values. You can use either one. All constants are given in the tables, and you can use them during the exam. Now, after we calculated the control limits, then you can draw the control chart. And to do so, we will do an example on Minitab. So I will share the screen now and show you how we can develop that control chart on the Minitab. we have the readings here given in the tensile strength reading for the 25 readings or 25 bolts reading. The moving range, as we said, it is calculated by you, but when you do the control chart on the Minitab, you don't have to calculate it because the software does it itself. You go to Stat, Control Charts, and then the variable charts for individual. I'm going to leave this for a moment so you can screenshot this one here, okay? And then you go to the moving range, or you go to the IMR. Both of them will give you the same, but if you need to have both control charts, the X bar and the moving range, then you can use the IMR. So you select the data, the tensile strength, and then you press OK, and then the charts will be developed. When you choose the IMR, it will develop both the X bar and the MR chart. If you select the IMR, it will develop both of them. If you have select the individuals or the moving range, it will develop only one of those. So it will develop the individual chart only here, and it will develop the moving range here. But when you select IMR, that's mean, it will develop both of the charts for you. This is how you achieve to the control chart for individuals in the Minitab. We used to go to the subgroup X bar R and X bar S when we did the previous variable control chart. But here for individuals, because we deal with this individual moving range chart and doesn't have subgroups, so we go to the individual moving range control chart. Okay, that's how we develop the control charts on for individuals in the Minitab. Again, you can download this image here by save graph as or print it. Even you can edit and write title or whatever you want. So this is how you can. Also, you can double click on the figure so you can enlarge it and add some text here and there. Okay, you can write your student ID if you are submitting this as a file or attached file with the question. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. This chart or this table and figure, it shows you a summary of this chapter control chart, and it is very important to keep it next to you so you can refer to it and refer to the decision-making criteria for the control charts. So first, we are dealing with the variable data. So this is the first thing we have to know. We are not dealing with the attribute data, variable data. If we are dealing with attribute, then we will deal with different control charts that we will handle or we will cover in the next week. The variable or the next chapter. The variable data is contained of 3 control charts that we have covered: X bar S, X bar R, X bar MR, or I bar MR, or individual moving range, or X moving range chart. All of these are the same name for the same chart. The X bar S, if you have sample size 11 or greater than 10, that's mean 11 or more. If you have sample size between 2 to 10, then you deal with the X bar R chart. If you have individual samples group or individual readings, then you'd use the IMR. The formulas are summarized here for all those control charts. The X for the MR, the X bar for MR here, the X bar for the R chart, the X bar for the S chart, and the R chart, the MR chart, the S chart. The first one is representing the X bar or the individual charts. So those are the formulas and the decision criteria all summarized in one slide for ease, or make it easier for you to review and recall how the control charts are being found and can be calculated. That is all for this control chart and this chapter, control charts for variables. And now the time for the questions and discussion.